All right, we're back. We are COMP1073, that's client-side scripting, in the winter 2017 semester at Georgian, and we are week 13, part 2 of our broadcast, talking about CreateJS again, which is definitely 100%, no holds barred, going to be on your exam, 100%, right? Why? Why CreateJS? Because it's fresh in your mind, stuff that you're seeing right now and last week, and the week, and probably other weeks as well, right? So that's one. And the other thing is we're using TypeScript and CreateJS. TypeScript is giving us object-oriented JavaScript, and we're using modules, and we're using functions and referencing different things. We're doing all the things that we've been doing all semester, kind of as a culmination, kind of putting everything together to create something finally, right? And that's why it'll be on your final exam. So you need to know CreateJS. Please study the last 2 weeks, this week and last week's videos. You need to know these things for your exam. It will be on it. There is no doubt. I'm not going to kind of lie to you and tell you there's anything else. It's purely practical. There is no multiple choice true false component at all. So you must build something in the time frame that you have. Will it be that difficult? Probably not that challenging. If you've studied, the best way to study is to create lots of buttons and labels all over the place. If you know how to create buttons and labels, you're pretty much good to go. Right? So you need to do those things. Will it be open book? Absolutely. You'll have access to your files, my files, your assignment files, access to everything. And that's always dangerous, right? Because if you have access to everything, that means I can ask you anything, right? So I'm saying sometimes it's a positive and sometimes it's a negative. The negative is you have access to everything. That means I can ask you anything I want, right? Well, as long as it's covered in our code somewhere or in my PowerPoints or on the internet. What if you want to Google something? It's allowed. Go ahead, Google it, right? But if you don't know CreateJS and if you don't know how to do this, God won't help you on the exam, right? I'm telling you, you need to do it. You need to try this stuff. You need to play with it at home. You need to finish your assignment in order for you to know what you're doing. Otherwise, if you don't do your assignment, it's going to be more difficult for you to do. All right? All right, so we're into this second part of today, and we've talked about the button, but we want to simplify, right? Our button class is nice. You know, this part I can close off. I'm not going to modify my button.js, that's for sure. I'm not going to modify my button.ts. That's done. My app.ts I'm going to work with, my task.json, no. My index.html, maybe. Bower.json, no. So I've got my app.ts, my readme file, no, right? But you know what? In my app.ts, I noticed there's a couple of problems. Not problems, but places that I can, help myself a little bit, right? And the places are all these hard-coded values, all right? All these hard-coded values, these are hard-coded values, right? Wouldn't it be nice if somehow I could detect the size of my the actual canvas itself? Because then if I could, and if I want something centered, I could put center here and center here, and then we'd be done, a value, right? I don't want this to be a hard-coded value. What if tomorrow I want to make my canvas 500 by 500 or 100 by 100 or 150 by 200, right? I don't want to always come in here and modify this stuff. I want my application to be flexible, right? That's number one. The second thing is this width and height stuff, right? Wouldn't it be nice if somehow I can take care of itself? That would be nice too, right? So those are the kind of things I want to do. And there's some things we can do to detect. Okay, so tell me, what's one way that you can think of that you can detect the size of my canvas? How can I detect that? Remember, we have access to JavaScript, just like we did before. And the canvas is just an HTML element. So how can I detect the size of my canvas? Width and height, right? The width and height are already in my canvas, right? So if I look at my index.html, right, here it is. You can see that I've already defined the width and height right here, 250 by 250. But I can certainly read them. I can read this information, right? How? I have access to my canvas ID. With that, I have access to my canvas element. With that, I can look at the attributes, width and height, and find out what they are, right? How do I do that? Well, going back to my app.js, here, at the top, right? When I instantiate my object, which is the canvas right here, when I kind of create that reference, I could do something like this. I know it's a canvas element, and I can look at my attributes, canvas.attrib, right? And I can look at get attribute, right? I can use the get attribute. That's just a HTML thing, right? And if I open it up, I can see that the name of the attribute is whatever it is. So for example, width. That's my attribute. Yay! And I can do the same thing, get attribute height. But I haven't really assigned this to anything, and I need some kind of containers to hold this information, height and width, right? So what I could do, right, is I could create some variables to do that, right? For example, you know, something like canvas width, which is a number, and let canvas height also equal to a number, right? And down in here, I could say canvas width is equal to this. And did I do something wrong? Canvas, did I spell it wrong? Canvas width. Why is it giving me this error? Oh, of course. I'm listening for a number, and I'm getting a string, right? That's what it's going to give me, a string. So I want to convert this to a string, to a number. How do I convert this to a number? I want to parse, right? I want to parse this thing. So if I type the word parse, and if I do parse int, there's the one I want, parse int. And if I put the string that I want to parse inside of this, which is this, I can parse this as a number now, right? Same thing with my height. Canvas height is equal to parse int, get attribute. Now I know my height and the width of the canvas, right? Canvas width and canvas height. I've defined those two things. So now I can take these values that I've read from the canvas, right? And I can sub them in down here, right? Because like I said, hard-coded values are bad, right? But, oh man, I don't want the height. I want half the height and half the width. Oh man, it's crazy. I gotta do that again. I gotta make more variables. Here, let me see, make more variables. So let canvas half width, right, is equal to a number, right? And let canvas, oh, spelled this wrong. Canvas half height is another number. And this is crazy. What am I doing here? What do I really need to do? I'm actually putting together a new class, my own custom canvas class, right? That can hold information about the canvas height, the canvas width, the canvas half height, half width. They can do actually the canvas object itself. Lots of stuff, right, that it can do. And I can instantiate this new object and make a reference to it, right? I could do that. I'm not going to do that here, but let's suppose that, I mean, if I want to, I've got all these different properties that I'm setting up here, but I don't have to do it this way. So now that I've done this, I can just say something like this. Well, then if I know the width and heights, I can always say canvas half height or half width is, did I do that? Probably half width is equal to canvas width times 0.5. And canvas half height, right, is equal to canvas height times 0.5. Now, why am I doing the calculation here? Because you know what? It's somewhere. I'm doing it here inside of my start method. I'm initializing. This is a good place to initialize, inside my start method, right? Cool. I've done this. Now I can go back down over here, and instead of putting 125, I can put half width, canvas half width and half height. So canvas half width. And you know what, just to make this easier, I'm going to put this on two separate lines so you can see it. And then canvas half height. There we go. Those hard-coded values are gone. I made a calculation to get those two things. right? And I might as well just copy this stuff in here. So I'm doing this over and over again, right? And this one isn't this isn't in the middle anymore. One is, but the other ones aren't, right? Like 200 is down a little bit, right? That's a special position. So it's not like a standard position that I've had before. So half width and half height, there's half width. It's not half height anymore, right? Because 200 is a little lower than half the height. So I could do an offset. Canvas half height, right? You know, plus a number, like, I don't know, plus 75, right? That's okay. Because then whatever the height is, I'm just going to add 75 to it, right? Now I want to get rid of these two things. These irk me, right? Because I know that there's a size. So I could put this in some other kind of file, right? First of all, though, let's check to see if all these changes that I put in place actually work. So save. I'm going to go over to my file and go to this one and refresh the screen, and we're good, right? Still works. Everything's fine. Now, how do you test it? Because I said half width, half height. Right now it's 125 or 250 by 250, right? How do I change this? Well, here's a test. If I made my canvas width and canvas height in my index.html a different size, so instead of 250 by 250, let's make it, I don't know, 640 by 480, some weird number, right? And if I save this now and go back, right? And if I refresh, oh man, what the heck? How come it's over here? What's happened? Did it really do what I asked it to do? It's over here, right? Should be over here. So let's do some debugging. Remember I told you, one thing is to think about how it's going to work, and another thing is to actually do. So there's no errors. That's number one. Can I read half width and half height? No, I can't here, because you know what? In here, I'm not really expressing it as a public variable. I'm not exposing this variable outside of my IFE, right? Okay. But where the heck is it getting that, right? I'm kind of saving this part. It's got to read it from somewhere, right? And if I refresh the screen, it's still showing me over here, which it shouldn't be. It should be over here somewhere. Notice that my screen size changed. This part was the new canvas, but this part did not change. All right. My app.ts, did it save? Yes, it saved. I don't store those values anywhere, so these values are being read in. Here's where I convert. This is a great place to test what they are. So I'm going to say something like this, console log. By the way, you can do different consoles. Maybe console.debug. I can put that in there. And I can put in console.debug canvas width. And I want to show what that is. Maybe I want to use backticks to kind of interpolate that, right? So I'm going to say something like canvas width, right, is equal to, and again, remember how we do backticks, $, curly brace, right? That's interpolation, right? We want to interpolate the canvas width in here, right? I want to do the same thing for my console.debug for canvas height. I'm just using a new backtick. That's part of ECMAScript 6. Okay? Yes? Yes. I'm just getting some debugging information. I want to get this out to the console. All right, cool. Let's see what the console says. So inspect. All right, console. I got nothing. Why am I getting nothing? One possibility is somehow it didn't transpile. Right? So let's check it out. Because I've closed and opened my Visual Studio Code to upload it, update it, maybe I need to transpile again. Remember I told you the steps? If you don't transpile and you're like, hey, nothing changed. Remember the number one thing you should in your mind is, wait a minute, I did all these changes. Nothing's changing. Something's wrong, right? Even though my index.html changed and it changed the size of my canvas, my code didn't change somehow, right? So I'm going to Command-Shift-B to transpile. And if it was already transpiled, it would have complained saying your task is already running. It didn't complain, which means I never transpiled after I reloaded my Visual Studio Code. Now going back, you can see that it's supposed to be where it's supposed to be, and I'm getting values for my canvas, which is exactly what I wanted. So now, however big I make my canvas, these two things are going to be exactly where I put them, right? And I can also test this value now, right? So I don't need this anymore. Notice how the debugging values turned out blue, not black, because I used console.debug, not console.log, right? And the great way to test this would be when I set up my canvas width and canvas height, and down here when I put my button in place, maybe 75 is not enough. Maybe I want to add in 100 to whatever my half height is. So I think I need more separation in here, right? And you know what? Let's check a different size for my screen. So I did 640 by 480. Let's see what it's like for 400 by 400. I'm just changing whatever canvas size I want. And you can see now, right away, it adjusts to that canvas size. So regardless of what the canvas is, right, it will adjust. It will adjust, right? Okay. Now, this is not responsive, right? Responsive means that when I change my canvas on the fly, right, somehow, my size of my canvas will change according to how big my screen is. That's not what we're doing here. We're not practicing that. That's a whole other thing. And we can do that. We can actually test for if our screen resizes. So on resize is actually the event that we can track. And if our screen resizes, we can resize the canvas, adjusting it to a certain width. Right now, our canvas is exactly 400 by 400, but I can make it so that it is a proportion of my width, my window width and window height, right? And how do I read that information? Window width and window height. I can get that, right? There's two parts. We've talked about the DOM, the document object model, but there's something else called the BOM, which is the browser object model, which gives us window height, window width. We can do window inner width, window inner height to find out the height and width of my browser. And to show you this, I can get that information by, let's do a little console log. So I'll go to the top. And if I was going to just do it here in my start method, I just do it up here. So if I want to see what that is, I can do a console.debug, right? And I can say window.inner width, right? And console.debug window.inner height. When I do that, and if I go to my, hold on a second, when I go to my inspector, I can see that I have 1280 by 532, yes. Color. Example, console.info, right? Little info button that comes up, see that? That's the difference. If I go console.error, so you can make it so that there's different ones. Okay. So you can color your console for good feedback, right? Debugging information, right? All right, so window width and window height. These are good hints, right? Inner width and inner height of how my windows change, right? So depending on what the percentage of my window width and window height is, I can change my canvas proportionately. So instead of setting my canvas width and canvas height, right, I can set it on change, on my window change. And remember that down here we have a window event, right? We've been doing it the whole time, on load. Well, I can also do a window dot on something else, right? And if you look at all the different on things you can do with a window, right? For example, on resize, right? On scroll, if I scroll my window up and down, right? And a bunch of other really cool things you can do with the window object, right? I can do stuff. So let's say, for example, on resize, when the window resizes, I want to set some values, right? every time. I want to reset some values. Now, because I've set up these values up here, right? I've set up these values as global values. These are function level variables here in my IFE, right? Instead of setting up my half height and this kind of stuff over and over again, I could set up an event handler to do all this for me, right? Whatever the resize value is, right? Think about it. I want to do this work, right? But I don't want to do this work more than once. Every time I reset the value, I want to do a couple things. Yeah. Sorry? Yes? jQuery is just JavaScript library. You can use any JavaScript library in TypeScript, right? We did it actually, right? So I'm starting giving you hints. I could do that. I could say on reset, on resize, right? On the window resize, then set the values, right? And then I could call a function like start. Here I'm calling the start function, right? I could make another function called on resize, right? Which is a little function that I run when the window resizes, right? Let's try that. So I'm going to go to my another function. I have a main, right? And down here, just below main, right? In its own little space here, I'm going to make another function called on resize. Notice it's capitals, right? My on resize function is going to be triggered when the window resizes, right? On resize. Okay, so when the window resizes, I want to do this. Cool. What do I want? I want the canvas width and canvas height and canvas half width and half height all to be redone, right? Depending on what the window inner width and inner height is. I want these to change, right? So I'm going to copy all this and put it down here. But instead of parsing the width and the height now, I'm not going to do that anymore. I don't care about the width. I'm not going to put a width and height to my canvas anymore. That's inline coding. I don't want that. I don't want a hard-coded value. Maybe what I want is I want a value that I want to set, right? So my canvas width and canvas height, yes. Instead of getting attributes, I want to set attributes. I want to set the canvas according to my window, right? But first, I want to get the inner width, so window dot inner width, right? So some kind of portion of the inner width. Now you get a figure. If my window is 1,000, roughly 1024 by 768 is kind of a good size window for most of your applications, and I want to make my my canvas proportional to that, so some portion of it. Instead of it making, now your assignment says a fixed number, so this wouldn't be for your assignment. I'm just telling you how to do this if you wanted to make something responsive, okay? It's not for your assignment. Your assignment says it's got to be 300 by 300. It's got to be this size. So for your assignment, you need to set the size of your canvas. But in this case, I'm making it being spontaneous. It's going to change according to my size of my window resizing, right? So the way to do that is window inner width, and let's say I want to multiply it by a certain value. Like for example, I only want it to be half the window width all the time, right? And I only want it to be half the window height. Cool. And half the width of the canvas is half the width. Like this is all really cool stuff. Cool. I've got this, but then what I want to do is I want to set the canvas itself, the canvas size. So I want to say canvas dot set attribute, right? That's a JavaScript thing. And I want to set the name of the attribute, so that's the width, to a value, which is my canvas width. Canvas width dot toString. It's got to convert it back to string, right? And canvas dot set attribute height to the canvas height dot toString. I got to convert it back because remember my attributes in HTML, they're all strings, right? They're not numbers. So see, so here I'm reading the window inner height and inner width, and I'm setting them to the width and height of the canvas, and then I'm taking the canvas width and height and sending them back out to the actual attribute, the HTML element itself. Okay, cool. Now I want to invoke resize on resize, right, at the beginning of my start function, even though the actual window has never resized yet, right? When my application starts, I want to call this function right away, right? I also want to call it on resize, but I also want to call it the beginning. So let's just go to the top. And where I do all this crazy work, right here, I want to call on resize. So on resize, which is sets the size of the canvas. Do that one time, right? And then I do it every other time. As I do it, I reset everything. Now, that doesn't mean that my buttons are going to move around. That's just going to set my buttons for the first time. And then my window can resize wherever I want, and my buttons will stay where they are. And so will the other stuff. If I want those to change, then every time I resize, I got to look for those buttons and then change their position too, right? We'll do that next. And inside, just to test this, in my index.html, to test this, let's take away these values altogether. So there is no width and height right now. I'm going to set them, right? Now when I go back, and if I refresh the screen, you can see that there is an initial width and height. If I open this up, though, and if I refresh the screen again, you can see that it's going to do this, right? Half the height and half the width. And if I resize my screen, you can see that my canvas will automatically resize along with it. It's going to be responsive, right? It will only be at the maximum half height and half width of my screen. Okay. However, my window, my labels, and everything else will not change position. They're always going to be at the position that they were originally when it opened. So if I want to change these things, so it's moving around too, right? Then I got to resize the positions of those two, which means we got a little bit more work to do. Now this is assuming that I'm always going to have my labels and my buttons, that they're always going to be there on my screen, okay? So I can add that into my resize method, right? So inside my onResize method, right? Here's my onResize method way at the bottom. So I set my height and width of this. I set my attributes for my canvas, right? And then my label, my hello label, dot X and Y values have to be changed, right? My hello label dot X is going to be my canvas half width, right? That's what it's going to be. And my hello label dot Y is equal to canvas half height, right? And so is my goodbye label, because I got those two, right? Goodbye label dot, oh man, what the heck? Wouldn't it be nice if I just somehow detected my screen, my sizes, and each of the buttons and labels themselves were realigned? I could, but that would be another whole heck of a lot more code, which we're not going to do right now. Canvas half width and goodbye label dot Y is equal to canvas half height. And you know my button, right? So my my click me button dot X is equal to canvas half width, right? And my click me button dot Y is equal to canvas half height plus 100. Making it lower. All right, now what it'll do? Oh man, what the heck? What happened here? Ooh, do I have an error? Let's see what's going on, right? Oh yeah, we have an error. Why do I have an error? And I want you to think about this carefully. Why am I having this error? Uncaught top error, cannot set property of X of undefined. Why am I getting it undefined? Yes?
Because you added this label in the main method, it hasn't been called yet.
Correct. I never called my main method. I never called my main method, then what the heck am I doing? How can I add stuff and everything? That means I should check. I should check to see, right, what my, if they exist. And if they exist, right, if my label and everything else exists, if they actually have been instantiated, instance of, right, somehow, if my main has been called already, right, somehow, then and only then, right, that I can do this. So I want to do all this work only if my hello label has a value, it's defined. Like all this stuff is undefined right now because it's never been called. So we can say something like this. I can check for one of them. If I know one of them is existing, all of them have existed, right? So I can say if hello label, right, then right, all of this is good, right? I can check to see if it exists. So there's other ways to do this too, which you can definitely figure out if you think about it. I can set a variable, like for example, main started variable, and when my main's called, it'll set the variable to true, right? Otherwise it's false, which is also another way of doing it instead of calling hello label. So let's try this out. So I can say if app is started, right, as an example, I can set that up. I can say, here's another variable down here, let app started, right, be a Boolean, right? And I can set at the beginning over here, app started as false, right? So I can say, just in the beginning of start, I can say app started is equal to false. That's the default. So here's app hasn't started yet, right? And then inside main, I'm just putting it up there. See where it says app started? We don't need that anymore. We can say our app started already, right? App started is equal to true, right? And then when we do this, we can test for this in here. We can say if app started, that makes more sense than just checking for one of them. Then do all this stuff. And this basically says check if app started, then reset the labels and buttons, or realign. That's what we're doing. Okay, so if app didn't start, it won't do this work. It'll just take the default values, right? And the reason why we want to check to see if app started, it's only going to set these values after a resize, right? And it's going to resize once. It's going to call this function at the beginning when start method is called, right? All right, cool. We've got everything now. Okay, and this is good. Now you see how it reset it? And if I move this around, right, bam, it moves around and resizes my images, right, according to the size of my screen, right? Now this is the problem. Why did it do this? Well, this actually worked, but the problem is I said plus 100, so my actual button is down here. It's there, but it's just hidden, right? And it looks like it's almost like opening up, right? Now notice this is the maximum size. The maximum size of my canvas is half the width and half the height. That's how I set it up. Well, you can have other proportions. For example, 80% of the width and 80% of the height. How do we check that? Well, that's just up here. So instead of maybe if I'm not comfortable with 50, with 0.5, I can set it. So let's say, for example, I want it to be at least 60% of the height, right? Half canvas, half height, and half width, right? And I can say that, hey, what if I need it to be at least this big, at least 640 by 480, right? I can do that too. And go in there and say, well, if my canvas width is less than 640, then equal to 640. If my canvas height is less than this amount, make it that amount, right? If I want to make it so that it's always proportional to a phone, right? 320 by 480, I can do that too. I can say, make sure that it has these proportions, this ratio, right? I can check the ratio of my height over width, right, to create a ratio. I can do lots of stuff in here. There's lots of flexibility with this system, but there's also some problems. right? So notice that now I have at least 60% of my height and 60% of my width, right? Again, you can play with this number all you like. Like if I want to make it 320 by 480, right, as an example, or that kind of proportion, how could I align this? Well, depending on my window width and height, I could say it's got to be this ratio, right? Whatever that ratio is. And if it's less, make it that, right? So this is like 800 by 600. 800 by 600, right? Same proportions, right? 80 by 60. 8.8 over 6. 0.8 over 0.6, right? 800 by 600. If I might make it 320 by 480, right? Proportions, 32%. If I want to make it the same proportions, now this is 480, so you have to double this, so this would be like almost the whole height of the screen, right? Whatever kind of proportions you want to make. So 64% is pretty cool, but this would have to be double this, 96%. So this is almost the whole length of my screen, right? That's 320 by 480, right? So if I want to do this, you can see it's still going to take the same proportions, right? Whatever you want. And it'll change the button wherever you want to put it as well, right? If it doesn't do this for you, that means you missed something. Okay. Why am I showing you this? Because this is the way we can make responsive, we can use responsive design with our canvas. So depending on the size of my phone, if I'm putting it towards a phone or towards some other adaptive layout, I can still have a canvas, right? It's flexible, and I'm using all of JavaScript, all the stuff we've learned from JavaScript to do this kind of stuff, right? Still, the click me button works no matter what I do, right? Still does the hovering, all that same stuff works. The only thing that I would love to see with my click me button, oh man, is if I can preload this thing, because you know what? I'm kind of loading it on the fly, right? And I don't want to do that. So first, let's add a little bit of a some code here. So what I'm going to say is, inside my module, I made some changes. These are the things I changed. I'm going to say, created a responsive canvas, right? That's what I really did. And we're going to push this to GitHub. So that's one thing I did. And I just did that. Remember how, just to recap, I did that. I'm going to make some comments here. Right? Oops. I did that by, so this method responds to the resizing of the window object. Okay? And if you want to, you can say at method, right, which is on resize, right, and at returns, at returns void, which is what it did, what it does, right? It's void, doesn't return anything. Just to finish off the code here, and these events, so we can also comment these out. So window binding events, right? We're doing here on load, we call the start method. On resize, call the on resize method. Guess what I'm just to add some comments here. That's all I've done. Now let us fix this other problem to get hints of what to do, right? Because we want to use our preloader, right? Remember, we're using a suite of libraries, CreateJS, right? And to use the preload function of CreateJS, it's built in, right? All we need to do is go to the CreateJS library to get some hints. So createjs.com. And I want to get, some kind of docs on my preload.js. So there's docs, preload.js. And it gives you some code hints right here of what it looks like. I need to create something called a queue, right? And I want to call the load queue method. Think about this as what I'm loading in. I'm loading in a queue or a line, a stream of objects. That's what I'm loading in. So here's my file stream. I'm loading it in, right? And then what I can do is I can load things like sounds, preload sounds if I want to. I don't have to do this though. Now here's the event handler. On complete, when it's finished loading, right? Then I can call my handle complete method down here where I can take the result of my image and assign it to an image. That's a lot better, this thing, than what I did before, right? So this is kind of what I want to do. And here's my manifest. I can even have a queue manifest here, right? I can say, hey, queue load manifest, and I can assign an array of objects that I want to load, right, from my files, right? So this is what we're going to use as a pattern, right, to do my preloading. Okay, let's check this out. So we're going to do this, right, before we do anything else. So before we run our canvas or whatever, we want to preload the first thing that we do. It's almost like we need another method before start. And we want to call this method, right, before the start method is called. Okay? Now we can call this method something like init, right? So let's make a new method called init. And the init method, right, is going to return void. But what it's going to do is going to preload the function, or the reason really why this method exists, right? This method preloads all the image files for the app. So it does. We're going to say, just to kind of be good, we're going to say at method is init, right? At returns void, which doesn't return anything, doesn't take a parameter, right? Well, this is what it does. Okay, we haven't thought about how to do this, but we want to create this new object. And if you notice what it does here, it says, a queue is a new CreateJS load queue, and I want to be able to access my queue or my loader anywhere in my document, right? Which means it's got to be here in this functional level scope, or global scope, if you will, right? So that means, let's just put it here somewhere. We're going to say let loader, we're going to call it loader, is equal to a CreateJS load queue. That's what it is. This is a load queue, my loader. Cool. We have to instantiate it. We have to say something like this. Loader is equal to a new CreateJS load queue. Load queue. This creates the container. This is my stream, or call it the file stream, or my load, kind of my container, my load container, or my payload, if you will. This kind of creates once I create my load queue, I have access to the file system. That's what I want you to think about. That's one. I don't care about this plugin right now because I don't have any sounds in my application. If I did, I'd want to install my plugin, right? But I don't need that. I've done this part. This part is completed, right? Now here's the next part. I want to create an event. When the loading is complete, then call something. Guess what I'm going to call? Start, right? When loading is complete, then call start. Don't call my start method until my loading is complete, which means that init is going to be called on window load. So instead of it being on start down here, we're not going to call start yet. We're going to call init, right? And when I come up here, right, I'm going to bind the loader. I'm going to say something like this: loader dot on complete. So when I'm finished loading, then I want to call my start method. So call start when finished loading. Make sense? That's nice and easy, right? So don't call start until you're finished loading. If you're not finished loading, don't call start. It's not gonna do this function at all. So we always do this preloading first. All right, so that's cool. I like that. Now we can load a file individually like this, but wow, what a waste of time. I'd rather do my manifest, load manifest, which is way better, right? So I'm going to do something like this. I'm going to say loader dot load manifest. This one. And inside my manifest, notice it takes a manifest. That's what it does, right? That's what the kind of thing it is, which is a string or an array. Here we have an array of objects. That's what it is, right? So we're going to put that in. So here's an array of objects. And here's my manifest. I can put my manifest in line if I want, or I can put it in a separate file. I can do all kinds of stuff. But I need to have the my manifest set up like this. Each of the objects in my manifest have to have an ID and have to have a source. So I'm going to just grab this from the site and kind of replace this. So instead of my image, this is the friendly name for my image now, which is going to be called Click Me Button. And then my source to the image, well, that's just way down here, right? I'm going to copy this part. This is the actual location of the image, right? That is right here, right? So we're saying, hey, load this manifest. Load a manifest of files or objects that I want to load in. Preload all these objects before I run anything. With multimedia files, we always want to load ahead of time, preload. Because if I don't preload, I'm going to have some weird effects sometimes, especially when it comes to special devices, you know, whatever. We want to preload our images. Okay, cool. So far, so good. We've done this part. How do I use this click me button object now that I've defined here in my loader, right? Well, going back to this, we have an example. Q, which would be our loader, dot get result, and then the name of my image. I'm going to put this in place of where the other thing is. It's going to be an output. There's going to be an output here. It's going to actually be the image itself. Cool. That means that down over here, where I had my hard-coded value, I don't want to put this in here. I just want to put the name of my file, which is going to look like this. Loader, right, dot get results, and then inside of there, click me button. That's what we called it. But there's a problem. Now, this is not a problem with the CreateJS library. This is a problem with TypeScript. Hey, I'm just putting it out there too, right? TypeScript is not perfect, and this is something that I want you to learn, right, about this stuff. The API documentation says I can do this, but TypeScript says something's wrong. Why is that? Because when you look at the button object, it needs an image string. That's what it's looking for. But I'm actually feeding it something else. I'm feeding it this object here, right? This is returning an object, not a string. So I don't want to do this here. I want to do this here. Click me button. Follow me for a second, right? Because this is what I really want to do. A click me button hasn't any value. It's just a string. I want to take that string and convert it into an object that I'm loading. What the heck does that mean? Well, there's a couple things the way I can do this. In my button, I can also pass a reference to my loader method, which is probably what I want to do. So at the back or at the front, wherever you want to do it, let's do it at the front. We're going to pass in loader. We don't have that right now because there is no ability for us to pass loader in to my button class. I'm going to change my button class. I'm going to go back to my button class in my objects, go back to my button.ts, and where it listens for, actually, I'm going to change some of this around too, because you know what I found out? I don't like the is centered being here because in my label, we did it differently. I want to keep consistent. In my label, we did the is centered at the bottom. In my button, we did the is centered almost at the top, which doesn't make any sense to me. I want to take this part, and I want to put it down here. Oops, it's going to realign this stuff. I'll show you what, this is just the comments right now. And then I'll upload this to GitHub so you can see my changes. And that means the same thing goes here. I want my is centered to be is going to be in this order, so this is going to be at the bottom. This is just an ordering now, right? And in here, before my image string, I want to get a reference to my loader. And I'm going to test for it. I'm going to say something like this. I don't care if I'm not going to hold this value. I'm only going to pass the value in, right? By reference. Because it's an object, I can do this. And I can say something like this. Loader, right? Which is of type CreateJS .loadQ. That's what it is. Okay, so CreateJS LoadQ basically says, I'm listening for a loader. Yeah. This? No. Thank you. Okay, that's cool. And now instead of my image string going directly into my superclass, I want this to go like this. Loader dot get results, and then pass in the value of my string. That's the way it's going to be passed in. So basically, it's going to pass in the loader method, the preloader, and I'm going to take the image string that I'm going to load in and use the get result method of the loader to convert that string into a blob, an object, that I'm going to pass into or feed into my superclass, which is the bitmap class. A little bit complex, I'm sorry to tell you. But remember, we're at the last class, so I can feed you some complex stuff at the end, okay? So this, just to give you a little bit of a categorization here, is send the result of the preload queue to the superclass object, superclass constructor. That's what I'm doing here. Okay? Not that difficult, but more complex. Lots of stuff, man, but does it work? That's the question. Does it work? I always ask that question whenever we try and make changes. Let's go back, first of all. Okay, this is wrong because remember I've reorganized this, so this true has to be at the end. I say, yeah, it's got to be organized. I got to be down here like this. Okay, cool. That means I don't need it up here. And now everything is good. So I'm passing in my loader. Here's a reference to my loader, right? I'm doing my click me button. That's the name of my button now. I'm passing in my width and my height. Do I need that anymore? Can I get away with using my blob? This thing here has a value, right? It has something. I can detect it, right? Not like before. Width and height, I know something now, right? I got some information, right? Could I do something with this? Maybe, maybe not. Let's see. So this part is all done. I don't have to do any of this stuff. I'm good, right? So I can kind of close this documentation off. And just like you saw there, I'm good, right? My image is still loading, right? And I've transpiled, right? But I'm preloading now. Now, you might not notice a difference in performance at this point because our application is so darn small, right? That there's no real application, performance boost, right? But if I had thousands of images, not just one, thousands for my application. Example would be if I was making some kind of game or some other kind of application that required different images to move around different places, preloading would be the thing that I would want to do because every time I instantiated an image the other way, I would have to call the file system. And every time I call the file system, there's a bit of a lurch in terms of performance, right? I don't want to do that. I want to have consistent performance throughout. So I'd rather the user wait a second, and notice sometimes we see that loading screen of the user. The reason why is because they're preloading. They're preloading all the images so that when the application is loaded, we have good performance throughout, consistent. Okay, cool. So this is the preloading piece. I'm going to add this in because it works. Otherwise, I wouldn't have got that. So I'm going to kind of add this in. I'm going to say added preloading to the app. Push. There we go. Now, the ultimate test. Can I, and I may not be able to do so still, because we have to think about this a little bit. I'm sending in the values here in my button. If I go back to the button class, just for one more second, even though I have the image here, here's where I have my information. I don't really have it here, right? But I do have it here now. I may have it here, right? I may have this regex and reg-y because I'm sending in an object over here as opposed to a string like before, right? So I'm going to have more the ability to do that. So let's try it out, right? I'm going to leave the values up here. I'm going to still listen for width and height, right? But for now, I'm going to ignore them. I'm just going to comment these out, right? And I want you to try this too, right? See what the difference is. And I'm going to actually copy them as well. Copy them and paste them. And uncomment these ones, this set. And what I'm going to do here is instead of the width and the height, I'm going to take this dot get bounds dot width, dot width, and this dot get bounds dot height, and see if it's been taken care of for me. If it wasn't, it's going to give me a big error. And just to do that, refresh your screen, right? And to really check this functionality out, put this inside of an incognito window, right? So you know there's no caching. So if I go localhost 3000, if it doesn't load now, right, then you know that there's a problem. Right now there's no caching because my incognito screen does not cache, right? So this will still work, and I still see my object, and it's not giving me these issues anymore. A really cool test is if you closed off this and use a totally different browser, right? That's a really good test to use. And actually stopped your application. So let's stop our application. I really want to try this out to make sure it's finalized. So I stop my application, okay? I'm not going to even use Chrome as my browser anymore. I'm going to use something else. I'm going to use Firefox, right? So now for sure there's no caching there, right? Here's Firefox. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to relaunch my application now. So I'm going to go light server. There it is. Cool, cool, right? Take this and dump it into Firefox and see what happens. If anything goes wrong here, we would know, right? Because Firefox, absolutely, there's no caching. There's no relation to Chrome, right? So we know this is working, and we're not getting an error. And we know this for a fact. Let's check to see if the resizing still works. Well, that was weird. Look at that. Whoa, right? As I'm resizing, it's trying to figure out what the heck I'm doing, right? And when I'm finally done, it puts everything in place. But in the beginning, right? In the beginning, when I was doing this with the thing, I get my positioning weird whacked out because it's trying to figure out what I'm doing. As soon as I'm done, we're good to go, right? Right? Okay. So we proved that out, I think, pretty good. We proved out that preloading helps us out. Because we can do this, we don't need to do this, right? That means we don't care about width and height. If we don't care about width and height, right, and we don't have to take them in as variables, which means we can eliminate this part. If we eliminate that part, then we need to change our app.ts on this side because we don't need width and height anymore. So we can just kind of do this. Now it's more dynamic. So now it doesn't matter how how wide or small your buttons are. We have a more flexible class, right? Which is what I wanted to create in the first place. Great. So let's just do this. I'm going to say updated button class, right? Which is what I did. And I can put more details there, but for now, I think that's enough. Any questions around this stuff? I know I've made a lot of changes, but the place to check is please check my GitHub to see what I did, right? Now, this is a great thing. Let's say, suppose you say, Tom, I don't want all these extra changes. I don't want to be responsive at all. Is there a way I can check your code, before all this stuff? I want to look at your code beforehand. How can I do that? Well, it's all on GitHub, right? So if for the exam, if you need my stuff to what to look at, remember you have all of it. So if I go to github.com, right, and if I go up here and if I look at my lesson 13, right, remember that I have all my commits here, right? So I've done these commits. Here's all the different commits. And if you notice, here's where I did the responsive canvas. So if I go back to here, where I added my button class, right, before I did my preloading, right, if I go back to here and I check, these are the files that I changed, right? So they changed all these things. These are the minuses mean subtractions, the reds, right? And the positives mean additions, right? These are the things I've added, right? This is one of the things you can check here. So this is what you can actually check code every commit, all right? Which is pretty good. That means you can see what my everything looks like before I did my responsive design, right? This is this part. And not only that, but you can also check, so if I go back to my, this part here, this commit, you can also check all the stuff that's changed. App.ts changed, as well as button.ts. Here's my button.ts. You can look at that online, as well as my index.html. That changed because look, that was all wrong. I fixed that problem, right? This is right at the beginning, and I added, this is my plus, I added my button.js to my index.html. So every commit has lots of information that you can go and check this out, right? So very, very interesting. And the great thing about commits is you can add comments to somebody else's commit. Here they are at the bottom, right? I can add some comments if I want. And I can do other things. All right. Going back to my code now. If you want to see my latest code, you can see it here by going to scripts, going to core, going to app.js, right? And this is where I made all these changes, where I have my preloader in place and everything working. So to recap, right? I added my preloader, right, up here at the top. Here's where I added my preloader in a new function called init. This function gets called when the window loads for the first time, right? I create my container, my load container. I listen for any kind of, when my loading, all my loading is complete, and that only happens when my click me button has finished loading. Now I can put in as many buttons as I want, and I only do one file system access this way, right? I've accessed the file system at the beginning. So I can load a bunch of different things, 5 files, 10 files, 100 files, 1,000 files, and I'm going to do that file system access one time at the beginning, which means there's going to be a little bit of loading happening, right? Well, I can also check for my progress. I can have a little progress bar that I can create, right? Based on how long it takes for me to load my files, I can check for the progress percentage, and I can create a dynamic image that kind of loads or changes size as I'm finished loading. And I've already done that one time. Remember that game that I made that I showed you, Starbase 12? Did I show you that game? I made this game with CreateJS, right? Now I'm a Star Trek fan, so please forgive me if people are watching this. You know, it's not because I want to tell you it's the best game ever, but it's the same thing. Here's my loading. I'm preloading my images. You can see how long it's taking, right? And now I'm finished loading. That little load bar is another event that I'm using to wait for all my images for my application to load, and then I can play. I'm not going to play this game right now. I'm just showing you this is a game I made with CreateJS, right? From the beginning to end, and TypeScript, which helped me make this game, object-oriented. Okay, so this is using some images and files from the Star Trek universe. Okay, so that's what it looks like. That's what preloading looks like. I'm not going to go into that, but if you ever want to look at from a documentation perspective, if I want to create a kind of a loader, some kind of slider that looks like it's loading up, right? As an example, you can do that. If I say CreateJS loader, right, image, then there is a lot of an image loader. There's a lot of documentation on how to do such a thing, right? Remember that my preload.js gives me hints on how to do it. Here's this part, but it also gives me a bunch of other stuff. It allows me to use cross-domain loading as well as my own XHR object, which we covered in Ajax. So you can use it to load a lot of things, not just files, not just images, but anything you want, right? Which is kind of cool. And it also has other kinds of events that you can use that come along with it. Look at all the different kinds of loaders it has. A text loader, a tag request, all the other things that you can do that are built into preload. For example, JSON loader. I want to load JSON files. I can use preload.js to do that for me. nicely, right? If I look at my JSON loader, as an example, there's going to be a bit of some code here. Here's an example of loading a JSON file, right? But instead of loading an image, right, I'm using my my JSON loader, right? And I'm not going to go through this, but there's probably the documentation that's here somewhere. Yay. And here's my JSON loader defined in JSON loader itself. Here's the constructor, right? It's called JSON loader, where I'm loading the item, whatever the item is. And you can see my load item is of type load item object. You can keep going through here and find out what it is. Okay. I think we're pretty good now. But for hints about how I did that thing, if you ever want to see, you can always go to, if you ever want to see what Starbase 12 is made of, this is going back a few years now, right? You can always go to my GitHub, right? If you go to my GitHub, which is GitHub /me, right? And if I want to search for my repositories, if I look at Starbase 12, there's different versions of it. I started off with version 1, which was pretty poor in 2014, and worked to version 4 by February 23rd, right? Of later, I kind of updated this year, but I didn't really do anything. I just updated one file. But if you look at this one, Starbase 12, inside my structure, you can see what I've done, very similar to this. I've got my assets and my scripts. Now, this is slightly different than what I'm doing now, but if I look at my scripts, I can see that inside my game.ts, right, where I do all these references I don't have to do anymore. By the way, all this, unnecessary nowadays. This is all old, right? Remember, things have moved on, right? So I can redo my Starbase 12, make it version 5, right? No problem, and it'll be even more efficient than it was. So go through, and somewhere down in here, I'm doing my preload. Here's my preload. Take a look. Managers, assets, init. And then I'm adding an event listener for progress. Here's my progress, right? So my loader progress, on progress, I'm going to handle progress. And here's my handle progress. Percent loaded is equal to the event.loaded method. So how much of it have I loaded? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my loader bar, which is that little image, and update it. I'm going to send an update to my loader bar based on the percentage that I've loaded. I'm going to keep updating it. Every time I call the update method, it's going to make that loader bar bigger and bigger. So it looks like I've finished loading. All right. Okay. So lots of stuff you can do with CreateJS. I want to finish off now today a little bit early, not too much early, 10 minutes, let's say. But let me talk about the next week's exam. So remember, please come in, just to finish off, please come in on time. All right. I'm going to start my exam promptly. In fact, being like 10 minutes early might be good, right? I will not accept anybody coming into the exam half an hour in. If you're half an hour in, 30 minutes past the exam start time, you will not be able to write your exam. So please be on time. Okay, that's the first thing I'm going to tell you. Please turn off your cell phones, all that kind of stuff when you come in. You have access to the internet. You have access to all your files, the files on your system, whatever. Please don't share files with anybody else. Please create a private repo for the exam when we get together, right? You can sit next to each other, but no talking during the exam, just like any other normal exam, right? It's not that difficult, the exam I set out for you. You just need to know a little bit about CreateJS and TypeScript to make things go, right? So I need you to know all the stuff that I did today with resetting and resizing and responsive design. No, I'm just telling you today. I'm going to get you to know tomorrow. Forget it, right? All I want you to know is, not even preloading. I'm not going to even ask you that question. All I'm going to ask you is, hey, can you make a button work? Can you make a label go somewhere? Can you resize the canvas to a certain size that I told you about? Hey, how about random numbers? Can you make a random number go? Hint, hint. These are the things that I'm going to make you do. If you can do random numbers and set up images and labels in certain places, you're good to go. And that's what you should train on. Try and put images and labels anywhere on the screen. That's how you should practice. And finish off your assignment. Any questions around the assignment before we go? Yes.
How do you stop your animation?
What do you mean? So you're moving your stuff around to certain place.
When you say you want to see when you click on it, if our animation would completely stop, like so it would be playing in the background.
All right. Well, depending, is it moving in the first place? I'm asking you to move something around, right? So if I want an image to move around, keep moving around until you click on it, right? What does that mean? So I'm moving to the right and left. But if I'm clicked on, don't move.
Okay.
If the image my button has been clicked, or this image button, whatever you want to call it, this whole thing is moving around. But if I clicked on it, stop. And take me to the project, which is what I really want you to do. How do I take you to the project? I'm going to redirect you, like I normally would do. I would switch your, what's being loaded. I want to load up the next this other screen. How do I load stuff? How do I load another page from JavaScript? Right? You guys should be able to do that. Right? And if you want to do that, if I say, load a new page from JavaScript, right? Load a page or redirect. We'll do a redirect. JavaScript redirect. How do I do that? Right? There we go. Window.location.replace, bang. Right? And then you put the name of your, so window, remember we talked about the window object? That's the window, the browser window, right? Location, the URL, replace the URL with this. And to check this, right? Here, let's try this out. Since you're asking, I'll show you, right? So let's say inside my click event, right? So here's my click event. Instead of doing my click me button, right, which is my, when I do goodbye and hello and all that stuff here in my click event, I won't do this stuff anymore. I won't change my text. I want to redirect. So I want to say window.location.replace. Let's try that. And I want to replace it with a URL. This is the URL that I'm replacing to. This is bad. So it's a call from my school, from the daughter's school. That's always a bad thing. I got to call them back. And it's always like, I got to stop. I got to not record anymore, right? Whenever I get called from the school, it's like, well, okay. I never get called. All right, so window location replace, and then http://. Let's make it go to google.ca, right? There you go. So as soon as I click on the window, boom, it goes to Google, right? Let's see if that works. So I'm going to go to my window, and am I still running it? I probably am. So I'll go to localhost. There we go. Click on the button, and we should go to Google, right? There it is. Bang. Okay. So that's how this works. You can also try something else. You can also try URL, right? Href. Right? Href. Does that work? Href. Why is it not giving me a problem? It is a string. Can't invoke an expression whose type lacks a call signature. Type string has no compatible call signatures. Did I do something wrong? Oh, yes, different way. So href is equal to this thing. Sorry. So that would be, if I did it this way, that's a different way than the other way, the location dot replace. I like location replace better myself. But if I was going to do that, if I was going to try this out, location localhost, click onto it, and it should do the same thing. So either way, that'll redirect you with JavaScript. Okay? Any other questions around the assignment? No? We're golden? Guys, good luck for next week. See you. And then, like I said, please study, do your assignment, your final assignment, and study CreateJS and TypeScript, and you're good. Thank you. Hold on.